and welcome to my video series examining the book Missing 411, Western United States and Canada by the author David Paulides. We will go case by case, and the format will consist of me presenting the case as written without scrutiny, then review any additional or contrary information that I am able to locate through my own research. My sources will be cited in the description below. Steve Martin. Steve Martin, who was 15 years old at the time, went missing on Saturday, August 16, 1975, from Petite Lake, Washington. At the time of his disappearance, Steve was with the North Central High School cross-country team from Spokane. They were on a camping field trip and practicing running the logging roads around Petite Lake. Around noon, Steve took off down a logging road wearing his cross-country shorts, shoes, and shirt. This was the last time he was ever seen. It wasn't until 4:30 in the afternoon that his classmates realized that he had not yet returned. A search began shortly after, launched by a call to the sheriff. That night, bad weather hit the area. Rain and fog hampered search efforts. Bad weather continued, and the air support effort was delayed by hazardous conditions for 2 days. Some of Steve's teammates proposed that Steve may have gone off the trail briefly to pick nearby berries. Searchers combed that area but found nothing. Steve's mother thought that he must have been kidnapped. She gave this statement to the reporters, quote, "If anyone took him from those roads and trails up there, I'm sure that they did it by force," close quote. She further stated that she did not believe that he would have left the trail by choice. The search went on for a week but turned up nothing. In July of the following year, 2 park employees were conducting a survey about 2 miles from Petite Lake, about 300 yards from the nearest trail, when they stumbled across human bones lodged in the heavy underbrush. In addition, they also located tennis shoes, shorts, and a shirt. The remains turned out to be Steve Martin. The sheriff stated that it appeared as though Steve had gotten lost, panicked, and then died of exposure. The area where the body was found is called Sema Meadows, and the nearest trail was on the main road that led to the lake. It must have been hard to miss, especially in a meadow. His mother never believed that he would have left the trail willingly. The weather was indeed cold and wet, though at least one paper reported that the helicopter was used on Sunday, so it's possible that air searches happened sooner than is reported in the book. Temperatures also dropped very low, close to freezing, which concerned searchers. It was regarded as unlikely that he would survive, given his attire. The main point I'd like to refute is that the idea is called a meadow, that the trail would be easy to see and the area would be easy to navigate. 2 women went missing in the same area around the same time while they were picking berries, something that was proposed that Steve would do. They were found, eventually, cold but alive. The woods in the area were so thick, though, that it was noted that the remains would likely have been lost again if not for the workers placing trail markers so that they could get back to it. Finally, as a bit of extra information, the FBI examined the body and found injury consistent with about a 30-foot fall, perhaps from a tree. They did not suspect foul play, and the remains were turned over to the family for the funeral. Tyler Jennings, who was 3 years old at the time, went missing on Tuesday, December 21st, 1982, from Aberdeen, Washington. At the time, Tyler was living with his mother, Sherry, and his mother's boyfriend, Jeff, as well as their dog. On the day that Tyler went missing, his mother had left home to attend a bingo game. This left Tyler, Jeff, and the dog together in the house. At some point, Tyler ran out of the home via the front door. The weather was very bad at this time, with winds so severe that it killed 2 locals. Almost 2 years later, a news article from May of 1984 ran a story about a psychic who wrote to the police. She claimed to have a vision of a plastic bag, a river, a German shepherd, abandoned property, 2 fruit trees, a sewage station, saw blade, a lock, and a for sale sign. This prompted law enforcement to search the river again, but they still came up with nothing. What is not particularly surprising, but somehow disappointing to me, is this statement from Paulides. Quote, "I believe a few select psychics can aid law enforcement in their search." Close quote. Everyone is entitled to have their own personal beliefs. What I don't understand is why he chose to highlight his belief in psychics in this case. This led to nothing. It was so vague that to me it sounds like they're just naming off a bunch of common things so that if even one of them turned out to have some tangential connection, they could point at that and say, "See, I told you so." But that's just my opinion. Let's review the facts. There are two versions of events, those reported at the time and those reported years afterwards. Using the reports of the time, we get a basic sequence of events like this. Sherry, Jeff, and Tyler are at home on Tuesday. Sherry leaves for bingo. A storm hits, and Jeff leaves the house, thus leaving Tyler alone, for an unspecified amount of time as he goes to take care of his boat that is in the river. Jeff returns. Sherry comes back about 9:30 and checks on Tyler, but he's missing at that point. Authorities are called. Another story, published in 2016, is mostly the same but has two key differences. Sherry, Jeff, and Tyler, as well as an unnamed 5-year-old daughter of Sherry's, are at home together on Tuesday. Sherry leaves for bingo. A storm hits, and Jeff calls a teenager to babysit the two children while he goes to take care of the boat in the river. Jeff returns at 8, and the babysitter leaves. Sherry returns at 10, checks on Tyler, but Tyler's missing. Her other child is still present, however. Authorities are called. Sherry passed away from cancer in 2016 without ever knowing what happened to her son. Tom Klein, who was 27 years old at the time, went missing on Monday, September 8, 1986, from Phelps Creek Trailhead, Chelan County, Washington. Tom was on a hiking trip, which was supposed to start on September 5th and go until the 8th. When Tom did not return, his friends reported him missing to the sheriff on the 11th. They didn't have any exact information, so the search was difficult. 3 days into searching, as the teams were about to give up, they located Tom's car at the Phelps Creek Trailhead. This renewed search efforts for a time. Helicopters were brought in at this point, and the search continued for about another week. Their efforts were in vain, however, as Tom was never located. While I can add a little bit of information, I'm afraid I can't add very much. Tom Klein shows up in a couple of articles that I could find, but nowhere else. He isn't on the list of Washington missing persons, he isn't in NamUs, and he isn't in the Charlie Project. I emailed the Washington State Patrol, and they got back to me saying that they looked through their records and couldn't find any reference to this person at all. It is possible that their record was purged before the database was collated and put online, but even so, they checked their physical archive rooms and couldn't find anything. They told me that they were going to forward my request on to someone else who might have more information for me, but it's looking pretty unlikely at this point. As far as the articles that I found, it actually reinforces the missing 411 narrative. Bad weather hit the area, which hampered search efforts, especially of a helicopter that they were trying to use. And Tom himself was a former U.S. Marine with extensive survival training. I was able to find a headstone that seems to refer to this person, although the headstone notes that he was an Army Ranger, not a U.S. Marine. I actually had some help on this one from a friend of the channel. They called the cemetery where this headstone is, assuming that this does indeed refer to the correct Tom Klein, and they inquired if this particular burial was bodiless. They checked their records, and according to them, there was a body interred, which means that he isn't missing, which would also explain why, if the case was closed, the sheriff has no record of him, NamUs doesn't have a record on him, and so on. He isn't missing. Take all of that with a grain of salt, though, because like I said, I'm not sure if this is the correct person or not. It just seems like a lot of things line up. Corey Fay. Corey is described as being in the top 10 most unusual disappearances for Paulides, so let's buckle in. Corey, who was 17 years old at the time, went missing on Saturday, November 23, 1991, from Tygue Valley, Oregon. Corey was good friends with Mark Maupin and asked if he'd take him along on his next elk hunting trip. Corey was well trained in wilderness survival and had gone elk hunting before. Mark agreed to take Cody, and they, along with another friend, departed on the morning of the 23rd. When they arrived at their hunting spot, they decided to split up and reconvene at 6:30 p.m. The hunting did not go well, and they inexplicably did not see any elk, despite Mark knowing that this was a good hunting spot. When they gave up and returned to the car, Corey wasn't there. When he never arrived, they grew concerned and they called the sheriff. Searches went on for 10 days and consisted of more than 250 people, horseback riders, search dogs, and helicopters. Nothing was found that year. The most prominent theory at this time was that one of the other hunters accidentally killed Corey and hid the body. Another was that he got lost, but he would have survived for a long time given that he had significant gear with him, including a survival blanket, food, and extra ammo. While the official search ended on the 1st of December, it continued unofficially for much longer. The FBI was brought in by the sheriff since no progress could be made. Now, the FBI do not get involved in these kinds of searches unless there's evidence of a crime, so it is clear that law enforcement knew or at least suspected something that they did not share with the public. In September of the following year, 1992, two hunters were 10 miles away from where Corey was last seen when they encountered something unusual. They found a backpack and a rifle. When a jacket also turned up about a mile from the other belongings, they informed the authorities. Officials located a tooth and bone fragments about a quarter of a mile from the backpack. It was stated that, at the time, this area would have been waist deep in snow. Corey would have to travel 5 miles in this depth to reach this location. Tracks had been spotted in the area by a helicopter last year during the original search, but at the time, they were determined to belong to an animal. How they could have possibly determined this is in question, however, as landing in the area with a helicopter would have destroyed any tracks. In news articles, Corey's grandparents had stated that Corey was trained to follow a stream downhill if he ever became lost. Instead of doing this, however, it appears that he did just the opposite and went uphill for quite some time. His final location was 3,000 feet higher than his starting place and was about 10 miles away. Corey's pants, boots, or socks were never found. This is unusual because boots are heavy, they don't just disappear. At the end of this case, Paulides poses a series of questions to consider. Where are Corey's boots, socks, and pants? Why would Corey remove his coat? Why would Corey drop his firearm? Why would Corey do everything contrary to his survival training? Could Corey have walked 3 miles in waist-deep snow on a cold ridgeline? And why would he have, if he looked below and saw that there was no snow? Why would he even be on a ridgeline in cold weather in the first place? Why would he be 10 miles from the point where he needs to be at in a one-day hunting trip? Why would the sheriff summon the FBI unless there's evidence of a crime? Where are the rest of Corey's bones? As we review this case, let's see if we can find the answers to any of these questions. In addition to teaching Corey survival techniques, his grandfather also noted that he was most likely panicked, disoriented, and might even be hiding from searchers. Sunset for that area in November is around 4:30 p.m. This means that Corey would have been in the dark for about 2 hours before they were even supposed to meet. I thought that this was strange at first, but it seems like elk is often hunted in the evening. It does help explain how he would have gotten lost to begin with. Theories around kidnapping were floated around, but that was less because of evidence and more because that was the only chance that Corey had of still being alive. We see this often in missing persons cases. The weather was so bad during this time that several searchers had to leave because they were catching hypothermia. Finally, let's take a look at what the family thinks about all of this. Corey's grandfather didn't think that there was any foul play. In his opinion, he thinks that Corey likely followed an elk, became hypothermic, and then got lost due to the confusion induced by hypothermia. Some of his other family members believe that he just got lost and that the reason he died was because the search was inadequate. not in terms of volume, but in terms of administration. Regarding the idea of the helicopter and the tracks that were seen. First, you don't have to land a helicopter to see tracks on the ground. You can send a ground team. Even if you do land to have a look yourself, you don't have to land directly on top of the tracks. Helicopter pilots aren't idiots. They know how helicopters work. Also, these tracks were 3 miles away from where his things were eventually found, so this most likely wasn't him. His belongings weren't in a pile, they were far apart from each other, likely discarded to lose weight as he went uphill. So now that we have a better idea of the case in general, let's review the questions. Most of them can be answered when you know the symptoms of hypothermia. A hypothermic person is not generally aware that they are suffering from hypothermia. Confusion and memory loss are also symptoms, and this leads to poor decision making. Given this, let's eliminate the questions that can be answered with simply, he wasn't in his right mind due to the confusion and loss of memory from hypothermia. So what's left? Where are Corey's boots, socks, and pants? Well, we don't know for sure, but it's not like we can't make a guess based on common sense. His bones were fragmented, likely scavenged by local wildlife. I'd wager that the most likely answer is that his remaining clothes were eaten or torn up and scattered. Why would Corey drop his firearm? Again, this was likely to shed weight while climbing a difficult hill, compounded by hypothermic confusion. Could Corey have walked 3 miles in waist-deep snow on a cold ridgeline? Well, we don't know how deep the snow actually was, but it appears as though he did travel 3 miles on a ridgeline. Since that seems like what happened, then yes, he obviously could have. Why would the sheriff summon the FBI unless there is evidence of a crime? Well, because they are known to assist local police whenever needed, and it was possible that a crime was committed. But why don't we get an explanation from the horse's mouth? After all, Paulides cites this time and time again, that the FBI has certain policies that prevent them from searching for people, so I decided, why not ask them directly? I emailed the FBI and asked them what their policies are regarding the investigation of missing people, especially those under the age of 18. Good afternoon. The FBI was given jurisdiction under the Lindbergh Law in 1932 to immediately investigate any reported mysterious disappearance or kidnapping involving a child, usually 12 or younger. However, the FBI can open an investigation into any missing child under the age of 18 as an assisting agency to the local police department. There does not have to be a ransom demand, and the child does not have to cross state lines or be missing for 24 hours. Research indicates the quicker the reporting of the mysterious disappearance or abduction, the more likely the successful outcome in returning the child unharmed. Regardless of the circumstances, the FBI will always seek to work in concert with our local counterparts, as no resources should be spared in these cases. The FBI has federal jurisdiction to work on kidnapping matters where the victim is believed to have taken across state lines. Additional instances where we may have jurisdiction exist if the facts indicate the missing person is a victim of human trafficking, victim of a violent crime in a public place, or in the status of a traveler, or if there is a terrorism nexus. Also, we routinely provide investigative assistance to state, local, and tribal law enforcement partners in the absence of a federal nexus where the local agency has primary jurisdiction. I hope that helps. Yes, I would say that helps very much. Thank you for your response. I think that moving forward, I will simply cite the same email every time Paulides brings up the FBI being mysterious for having been involved in any disappearance that falls under any of those categories. Lastly, we come to, where are the rest of Corey's bones? I think that the answer to this is very simple. It is the same as the rest of his clothing, likely consumed, broken apart, and scattered. And not to belabor this point longer than necessary, but what are the alternative answers to these questions? Let me know if you have better answers in the comments below. Bryce Florian Herta, who was 6 years old at the time, went missing on Sunday, April 9th, 1995, from Nia Bay, Washington. Nia Bay is a small town of less than 1,000 people and is adjacent to both the Pacific Ocean and Olympic National Park. It primarily has a commercial fishing industry and is surrounded by the Maca Native American Reservation. Bryce himself was of Native American descent, and his grandfather was the chief of police for the reservation. On the day of the 9th, Bryce and his family were walking on the Shishi Trail, which runs along the beach of the reservation. As they walked along the trail, it became too steep and rugged for Bryce to keep up with the rest of his family. Seeing this, they told Bryce to just go to the beach and that they would meet him there after they walked the loop on the trail. Bryce never made it to the meeting spot, and he was never seen again. The area where Bryce went missing from is very isolated, with exceptionally low traffic and few beachgoers. The coast itself is rocky with rough waters. Lakes, streams, and heavy forests are also throughout the area. In review, no, Nia Bay is not adjacent to Olympic National Park. The park is about 15 miles away, although I do understand the need of Missing 411 to mention any somewhat nearby parks. As for population, it has grown somewhat to be more than 1,000, but it was accurate at the time. Maybe it's just me, but the idea of telling your 6-year-old to hike a trail on his own to meet you later is just insane to me. Plus, it looks like when Bryce's family actually did get to the meeting point and he wasn't there, they weren't all that concerned yet, and they hiked back to the car thinking that maybe Bryce had gone there. After that, he was reported missing around 6 p.m. The scent was picked up by search dogs, and the location of where the dogs were tracking caused searchers to believe that Bryce was in the water. They sent out divers but found nothing. The family believed that he may have been kidnapped, which was the only way that Bryce was still alive given the circumstances, as there was also freezing weather at this time. Police never closed the case, but their final thoughts on it seemed to be that Bryce had most likely fallen victim to the sea. The area had cliffs. It was definitely not a safe place for a child to be walking around. Raymond Lee Matlock, who was 28 years old at the time, went missing on Monday, September 7th, 1998, from Bone River near Raymond, Washington. On the day of the 7th, Raymond went about 5 miles outside of his hometown to Bone River with some other hunters. His intention was to go elk hunting in the area. At some point, he got separated from the other hunters, who searched for him extensively, then informed law enforcement. Raymond was never seen again. I had a hard time finding information on this case at all at first. No articles, no NamUs profile. It didn't show up in missing person searches. So I expanded the search a bit to find a grave. It pulled up a Raymond Lee Matlock that would have been around the same age and has a death date of November 7th, 1997. Given that this is in Texas and the dates didn't line up, I was prepared to just chalk it up to a coincidence until I saw his entry in the Charlie Project, which shows up as resolved. According to that, his remains were found near Vancouver Island, and it wasn't tied to him until 18 years later. His remains were then sent to his mother in Texas, where they now reside. There was no foul play indicated. His body just followed the currents. He likely fell into the river and drowned. If you'd like to check out the full story, check the sources below for the entry from the Times Colonist. Jennifer Danielle Dusad. Jennifer Danielle Dusad, who was 22 years old at the time, went missing on Thursday, May 1st, 2003, from Humptulips, Washington. This case comes with the warning that there's very little information available. In fact, the only information that police could find after an extensive search is that she was missing. No circumstances or additional information was available. It is included to the book only due to the close proximity and physical similarities between Jennifer and Laura Flink. This case does not belong in Missing 411, but we'll cover that later. Jennifer did go missing in May of 2003, if you want to call it that, but it wasn't reported until 3 years later in 2006. The entire record in the Sheriff's Department reads as follows. Request call referencing missing adult daughter Jennifer Danielle Dusad. Last known address somewhere in Humtulips. Has been missing 3 years. This record does not indicate foul play directly, nor any contact with national forests or anything like that. The only reason that this case is included is because of other cases. In other words, we have directly broken the rule set forth at the beginning of the book. Stories are not selected based on their location. Instead, they are chosen because they fit my criteria. No. This one is explicitly chosen only for her location and physical likeness to other cases. Physical similarities are not part of the defined criteria. This case does not belong in Missing 411. Looking more into the case anyway, I see 2 main points. First, there are some articles that I found that seem to indicate a possible connection to some criminal activity. Second, and more importantly, there is a good chance that she turned back up. There is a Jennifer Danielle Dusad alive and well in Washington. She's the correct age, and the last names of one of the other people in her home also match the last name of the person who initially reported her missing. Looking at the missing report and the circumstances around it, my assumption, and disclaimer, it is an assumption, is that a family member was concerned that they haven't heard from her in a long time. They called her or tried to go to where her house was or where she used to live, and found that she wasn't there anymore. They didn't have any way of contacting her, so they filed a missing persons report with the sheriff. Nancy Moyer, who was 26 years old at the time, went missing on Friday, March 6, 2009, from Tenino, Washington. Nancy had 2 children, ages 9 and 11, both daughters. She was technically still married to her husband, Bill, but they had been separated for the last 2 years and presently shared custody of their children. Bill had both their kids with him on the weekend that Nancy went missing. Nancy was employed by the state in the fiscal office of the Department of Ecology in the nearby town of Lacey, which was about 20 to 30 minutes away. She had just finished her shift on Friday and was ready to go home. She took a co-worker to their house first, then continued on her way to her own house. The following Sunday night, Bill came to drop off their 2 kids. When they arrived at the house, they saw that Nancy's car was in the driveway. They went to the door and found it unlocked. Entering the home, they heard that the TV was on. They went further into the house and noticed that Nancy's purse and keys were in the kitchen, and a glass of wine was sitting on the table. Nancy herself, however, was nowhere to be found. Detectives from the Thurston County Sheriff's Office investigated and labeled the case as a homicide so that it would get the highest investigative priority. The area where Nancy lived in was very rural, with lakes, rivers, mountains, and hills. There were no fences between houses, so there's a lot of wide open spaces between homes. Nancy was actually seen after she dropped off her coworker. She was at a shop called Dave's Thriftway in Tenino. Further, the door wasn't just unlocked, it was actually slightly ajar. Her cigarettes and a lighter were outside on the front porch. There were no signs of a struggle inside of the home, and her bank account was not accessed after the Friday that she went missing. Now we get into more recent information. A neighbor and coworker confessed to killing her in 2019. He said that it was an accidental strangulation. Shortly thereafter, he recanted and said that he didn't know why he confessed because he didn't do it. And then later, he said he didn't remember confessing to begin with. He went on to then blame his confession on his medication. It seems like right now, police aren't sure if he's guilty or not, or at least not sure enough to charge him with any crimes. It seems strange, but people do confess to crimes that they did not commit somewhat regularly. Lindsay Baum, who was 10 years old at the time, went missing on Friday, June 26, 2009, from Grays Harbor, Washington. At approximately 9:15 that Friday evening, she left a friend's house and began her walk home. Her house was just 4 blocks away, but the street is on the edge of town, so it goes through some wooded areas. Lakes, rivers, and woodlands were plentiful here. When Lindsay still had not returned by 10:50 p.m., her mother, Melissa, called local police and a search was conducted immediately. However, no traces were found. The police then called the sheriff's department for some additional help, but still had no luck. When she went missing, Lindsay had no extra clothes, no cell phone, and no money. Her family does not put any weight on the theory that she ran away of her own accord. Lindsay was never found. The distance that Lindsay had to cover was just about half a mile, and we know that she made it at least halfway home, which had just put her at a quarter of a mile away from her house. The search included not just the police department and the sheriff, but also the National Guard, search and rescue, helicopters, and search dogs. The sheriff had a dive team that searched nearby ponds and creeks as well. Later on, the FBI joined in, sending some agents to help out. They ended up searching hundreds of homes in the area for clues. Finally, her remains were found in 2017 by hunters in Kittias County, and they were identified as hers in 2018. Authorities determined that she had likely been kidnapped, murdered, then dumped at that location. Her case is still unsolved. This video was sponsored by my patrons over at Patreon, and I would just want to give a special shout out to those of the public recognition tier. This time, the patron of that tier just wishes to remain anonymous. You know who you are. Thank you for making videos like this possible. And thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.